They never wanted you to see it, but you always did. Even in childhood, before the words had formed, there was a silence beneath things that unnerved you. Not the kind of silence that soothes, but the kind that waits, the kind that watches. Behind every celebration, every promise, every goal they handed you like sacred scripture, there lingered a shadow. At school they said everything was possible. At home, they said you could be anything. In love, they whispered that forever was real. And yet something in you recoiled, not out of rebellion, but from a quiet, unspeakable knowing that none of this would hold. That underneath all the movement, something was hollow. And now, that hollow has opened wide. They call it a crisis, as if what you feel is a malfunction. As if the panic, the despair, the listlessness are symptoms of error rather than signs of contact. You begin to unravel. The old motivations collapse. The meanings you used to chase feel paper thin. There is no pleasure in the victories, no safety in the routines, no warmth in the voices that once guided you. And so, they send you books, meditations, diagnoses. They tell you to be grateful, to reframe, to fix your thoughts. But you do not want relief. You want to understand what has broken, or, more truthfully, what has been revealed. For something has split open inside you. It is not a wound, it is an aperture, a view, and through it you glimpse something unbearable, that the story you live by may never have been true. The comfort you once found in striving, in believing there was a purpose to all this, moving, climbing, desiring, has disintegrated. What remains is not darkness. It is a pale, steady light. It does not blind. It exposes. And what it exposes is not your failure, but the world's machinery, the repetition, the reaching, the desperate attempts to cloak emptiness in achievement. You are not in crisis. You are in contact with reality. This moment, though drenched in dread, is not madness. It is clarity, raw, unwelcome, but honest. And that honesty is a terror to those who still live inside the dream. They will try to bring you back, not out of cruelty, but out of fear, for your seeing threatens their sleep. They will urge you to find meaning again, to re-engage, to seek love, success, spirituality. But what you want now is not a new mask. What you want is to look without blinking. Schopenhauer named it before the world could sanitize it. The will, he called it. That force behind all things, blind and endless, expressing itself through hunger, through desire, through becoming. What you feel now is not dysfunction. It is that will staring back at you, stripped of all its disguises. You see it in your own restlessness. You see it in others' eyes, in the birth of longing, in the death of hope. And most painfully, you see it in the faces of those still enchanted, those who think they are living when they are merely being used. They say you are lost, but you are not. You are simply beyond where their maps reach. The territory you now occupy is not chaos. It is truth without adornment. And while it burns, it also reveals the shape of things. That is not a crisis. That is awakening, and it is only beginning. You were taught that life was a progression, a sequence of triumphs waiting to be unlocked. If you worked hard, you would be rewarded. If you were kind, you would be loved. If you stayed disciplined, life would make sense. Every voice around you reinforced this. Parents, teachers, lovers, mentors. Their words formed a chorus of reassurance, building the architecture of hope. And so, you followed. You strove. You suffered nobly. But now that structure is cracking. You have done what was asked, and still, you feel the abyss. Still, you wake in the night with a quiet terror pressing against your ribs. Still, you feel the weight of an invisible lie, one that no amount of success can dissolve. And what do they tell you now? That you are burnt out, that you are depressed, that you need rest, a vacation, a new goal, a new lover, a new self. Always a new self. But what if there is no self to optimize, only a will to see through? What if the collapse you are experiencing is not the breakdown of identity, but the unveiling of its illusion? What if the pain is not a malfunction, but the body's revolt against meaninglessness? The mind senses it first, the body follows. Fatigue, numbness, a sense that everything once sacred is now absurd. These are not signs of crisis. These are signs that you've started to see the engine behind the theater. The world cannot accept this, for the world is built on a lie so foundational that even questioning it feels like heresy. The lie is this: that life is meant to be fulfilling, that your suffering is temporary and purposeful, that happiness is both your right and your responsibility. But what Schopenhauer saw, and what you are beginning to feel, is that the structure itself is broken, that life, at its core, is not a gift, but a burden. That existence is not a privilege, but a sentence carried out blindly by the will, indifferent to your cries. Look closely. Every pleasure you have ever known was preceded by lack. Every joy was simply the cessation of discomfort. You did not rejoice in having. You rejoiced in no longer wanting. The hunger gone, not the fullness gained, is what gave relief. And yet, the relief never lasts. Soon another desire rises, another reaching begins. The will awakens again, whispering that satisfaction is just over the next hill. And you walk and walk until your legs collapse beneath you. This is not a personal failure, it is the condition of life. So you begin to recoil, you stop playing the game, and the world responds with concern. You are not ambitious anymore, you are not hopeful, you are not engaged. But how can you pretend now that you've seen? Now that you've felt the truth under the skin of your routines, that every accomplishment is a distraction, every goal a mirage, every comfort a brief pause before the hunger resumes. This is what they call a crisis. But the word is wrong. A crisis implies something went off course, that something must be fixed or healed. But you were never off course. You were simply moving, like all things, under the command of the will. What has changed is not your path, but your vision. The blindfold has slipped, and what you see is not chaos, but design. A cruel, repetitive design that offers longing as a law and suffering as its consequence. You are not failing. You are waking up. And this waking comes with nausea, with vertigo, with despair. Not because the truth is wrong, but because the lie was so beautiful. The lie that love could complete you. That purpose would crown your days, that the future held redemption. But now you know there is no redemption in becoming. There is only clarity in seeing, and clarity is cold. It does not console, it does not rescue, but it frees. The mind resists this. It clings to fragments of the dream, a career to build, a partner to find, a legacy to leave. But the will is not interested in your fulfillment. It is interested in your function. You are a vessel, a conduit for continuation. And now that you have glimpsed this, you can no longer move as you once did. The world becomes transparent, like a stage set seen from behind. You know it is hollow, but you cannot unsee it, and so they tell you you're in crisis. But Schopenhauer would say otherwise. He would say you are in rare contact with what most spend their lives evading, that your pain is not a signal of disease, but a sign that your consciousness has matured beyond distraction. You are no longer anesthetized, you are awake, and while that awakening feels like ruin, it is in fact the first honest moment of your life. Now begins the descent. Not into darkness, but into a kind of sterile light that does not comfort, does not warm, and does not lie. The descent is not into madness, as they fear, but into clarity. For madness is to believe the lie with too much intensity, while clarity is to discard it altogether. And this clarity leads only in one direction, downward, inward, into the root of all suffering. Schopenhauer followed this path before you, and what he found was not a monster, but a mirror, the will. It is not malevolent. It does not punish. It simply is. The will is not some cosmic intelligence. It has no plan, no preference, no goal. It is blind striving, pure, ceaseless propulsion. It pulses through nature, through instinct, through desire, through you. It is the hunger beneath every movement of life. In plants, it stretches upward toward the sun. In animals, it prowls, it flees, it feeds, it mates. In man, it dreams. But dreaming is only the will in disguise, searching for permanence where there is only flux. Even your most noble intentions, your highest ideals, your deepest loves, they are all expressions of this same blind force, wearing masks to deceive consciousness into continuation. You once believed that desire was meaningful, that it pointed toward fulfillment, but what you see now is that it only points toward more desire. The will does not end when its object is attained. It only shifts, reforms, renews its hunger. That career you chased, now hollow, that love you thought eternal, now vanished. That vision of yourself you once worked to become, now just another illusion shattered on the rocks of existence. The will promises satisfaction, but it never delivers. It is a wheel without rest, a mouth without a stomach. And so, you descend further, stripping away the final illusions. Even happiness itself becomes suspect. It is never lasting. It is never complete. It is, at best, a brief pause between sufferings, a reprieve from the pressure, like the stillness between two waves. But the next wave always comes, and in that wave, the will returns, laughing without a mouth. The illusion was not just that you could win, it was that there was ever something to win at all. Here, in this philosophical depth, things become still. Not peaceful, there is too much truth for peace, but still, in the way a landscape becomes after a fire has cleared the forest. Everything stands exposed. You see the world no longer as it was advertised to you, but as it is. A realm of endless replication, each being forced to reproduce the very force that enslaves it. The animal eats to live, lives to breed, breeds to begin again. The human thinks he is different, but he too serves the will, through ambition, through romance, through procreation, through dreams of legacy. Even the philosopher writes not to escape the will, but to give form to its insight. No one escapes, not entirely. And yet, it is this very seeing, this unsparing recognition, that begins to lift the heaviest burden. For once the will is known, it can no longer deceive. Its masks fall away. The game no longer tricks you. Yes, you may still play, but you no longer believe. You may still speak of love, of goals, of beauty, but somewhere deep inside, there is a silence that no longer clings. The will moves, and you watch it. The body hungers, and you feed it. But the soul has stepped aside, observing now rather than obeying. You are no longer a soldier. You are a witness. Do not confuse this with detachment. This is not escape. It is not spiritual bypassing or numb retreat. It is the most honest mode of being available to one who has looked into the pit and seen the machinery at work. The will may still use you, it still beats your heart and stirs your thoughts, but you no longer identify with its voice. You know it now. You name it, and naming a demon weakens it. The descent strips you of comfort, but in return, it grants you lucidity. You begin to understand that the crisis was never a crisis. It was the crumbling of illusion. What others call falling apart, you now call falling through, to the bedrock, the root, the ground beneath all striving. It is not soft, it is not warm, but it is real, and in a world of endless simulation, reality, however bleak, becomes the only sacred thing. You do not feel better here, but you feel true, and truth, once tasted, becomes a kind of nourishment all its own. You learn to endure the hunger without expecting to be fed. You learn to see the repetition without being seduced. You learn to love not as rescue, but as momentary stillness in the river's current. And even then, you do not cling, because clinging to is of the will. This is the philosophical descent, the peeling away of every sacred lie until all that remains is seeing. And the one who sees does not scream anymore. The one who sees simply stands, silent before the storm, no longer asking why. There is a moment, strange and subtle, when the agony begins to loosen its grip, not because it has left you, but because you have ceased resisting it. After the descent, after the screams have echoed down the corridors of your solitude, after every mask has cracked and fallen to dust, what remains is not despair. It is a kind of stillness, a stillness born not of healing, but of surrender. You no longer beg the world to make sense. You no longer plead with the sky for meaning. You no longer contort yourself to become what they said you should be. Instead, you sit, unmoving, undistracted, and for the first time, you simply let the pain be. This is not resignation, it is recognition. You recognize the absurd rhythm of your existence, not with bitterness, but with the cold grace of someone who no longer expects mercy from a blind universe. You see how every effort to flee your condition only led you deeper into illusion, that your so-called crisis was merely the death of a dream you never consciously chose, but inherited from a world that cannot tolerate silence, cannot abide stillness, cannot live without purpose, even when that purpose is false. You are not in crisis. You are in contact with something that most never face, the emptiness behind the curtain, And now that you are here, now that your illusions have been unstitched, you feel no need to replace them. You do not run. You do not fill the void with new affirmations, new identities, new distractions. You allow the void to remain, and in doing so, it ceases to threaten you. What was once a pit becomes a space. What was once horror becomes awareness. What was once unbearable becomes bearable. Because in this strange light, you begin to see beauty, not the shallow beauty of comfort or fulfillment, but the severe beauty of truth, the kind of beauty that does not seduce but clarifies. You begin to feel a reverence not for life's sweetness, but for its cruelty revealed, not for hope, but for the courage to live without it. The chains have not been broken. They have dissolved, not because you were freed by force, but because you stopped believing they were necessary. And in this release, something else occurs, something unexpected. You begin to witness the movement of life without identification. You feel hunger, but you no longer call it suffering. You observe desire, but you do not bow to it. You hear your thoughts arise, but they no longer dictate your being. You are not detached from experience. You are simply no longer enslaved by it. This is not numbness, it is lucidity. A lucidity so complete, it no longer argues with pain. Schopenhauer understood this liberation, not as happiness, but as a silence of the soul, a cessation of striving, a willingness to remain in what is, without needing it to become anything else. To reach this place is not to win. It is to stop playing. It is to lay down your weapons and sit among the ashes, not in defeat, but in relief. You no longer chase after meaning. You let meaning dissolve like mist. And in that dissolution, you find something the world could never promise. Rest. Not the rest of sleep or escape, but the rest of no longer asking, no longer reaching, no longer running. You remain, breath by breath, within a life that no longer owes you anything. And yet, in that absence of debt, you feel strangely free. There is nothing to prove, nothing to justify, nothing to fix. What is, and you, seeing it clearly, need nothing more. You are not happy, but you are whole in your brokenness. You are not healed, but you are honest in your wounds. You are not saved, but you are awake. And in this wakefulness, there is a strange kind of salvation, not from the world, but from the illusions that made the world unbearable. This is your emotional breakthrough, the moment when pain no longer demands transformation, and clarity no longer asks to be comforted. You are not who you were, and you do not mourn the one who shattered. You walk forward, not into light, not into darkness, but into what is, into reality, naked, aware, and, at last, free of hope. And now, without illusion, without story, without the crutches that once held your psyche together, you stand, not as victor, not as survivor, but as one who sees. Life remains what it always was, indifferent, unyielding, blind in its procession of births and deaths, of desires rising and fading, of hopes promised and betrayed. But something fundamental has shifted. You no longer resist it. You no longer cry out for it to change its face. You accept, not passively, but with the dignity that arises from contact with truth. And that truth, however barren, is enough. The world still moves. Others still rush to build their palaces of meaning, still fall in love with the reflection of their own dreams, still chase after pleasures that vanish as they are grasped. But you now watch it all with a kind of sacred detachment, not because you are above them, but because you have passed through the same fire and emerged unseduced. You have seen the will behind the veil, and you no longer kneel before it. You let the will move through you, but you no longer mistake its voice for your own. There is a quiet power in this place. You no longer ask life to explain itself. You do not demand purpose from a world that did not ask for your birth. You breathe, you walk. You carry your awareness through time as one carries a lantern in the dark, not to banish the shadows, but to behold them without fear. There is no longer a need to win, to heal, to ascend. All of that was part of the dream. What remains now is seeing, and the one who sees is free. Others may say you've changed, that you're colder now, more distant. They do not understand that it is not coldness, but sobriety. It is not absence, but depth. You have simply stopped lying to yourself, to others, to the cosmos. You no longer pretend that things matter which do not. You no longer pretend that anything can be held forever. Even love, if it returns, will not be your salvation. You will not reach for it to complete you. You will meet it as one meets a passing storm, present, ungrasping, without illusion. And so, you continue, not with hope, but with clarity, not with ambition, but with stillness. You do what must be done, knowing it will never be enough, and no longer needing it to be. You do not renounce life. You simply no longer ask it to soothe the ache that lies at the root of all becoming. You let the ache be. You let the days unfold. You let the breath move in and out without drama. You are here, and that is all. This is not joy. This is not enlightenment. This is not redemption. It is something rarer, reconciliation. You are reconciled with existence, not because it is good, not because it is kind, but because it is what is, and what is, once seen without illusion, no longer needs to be fled. There is a kind of peace in that, not the peace they sell you in books, in therapies, in philosophies of improvement, but the peace that comes from having nothing left to lose, not because you've gained everything, but because you've seen that gain itself is part of the prison. You do not escape the will, but you do cease to be its puppet. You move, and you know what moves you. You desire, and you watch the desire pass. You hurt, and you feel it fully. But it does not own you. You are not in crisis. You are in contact with reality. And while that contact wounds, it also awakens. It calls you out of the dream. It strips you down to what is irreducible. And what remains is not a self, not a purpose, not a plan, but a gaze, silent, steady, unflinching. The gaze of one who no longer dreams of heaven because he has already walked through hell and found that it, too, was empty. If this met you where words usually fail, leave a trace below. Write what truth you can now live with.